Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this, the final day of our Muslim Women in Sport Network Summit, virtual summit for 2018. Welcome to this session, which is about business and leadership. And we're joined by three amazing, amazing women from across the world who are leaders in their own right, in their own special field within sports. I'll introduce them in a second, but just to say to you guys, please do interact with us as you have been doing. Our hashtag is, as I've said before, the MWSN for the summit is MWSN Summit 2018. So please do put your questions through Twitter, or it's a lot easier to do it on the YouTube comment section. So do put your questions in there, and we'll make sure that we get those questions across to our speakers. Now, as I said, we're joined by three leaders in their own right. We have Amna Karra-Hassan from Australia, who is an activist and an advocate, particularly for diversity, inclusion and gender parity, and she'll introduce herself in a second in more detail. We're also joined by Hanna Fauzie from Indonesia, who's a sports journalist and commentator, and as well as that, she's a community campaigner, and we'll be hearing a lot more about her experiences within sports journalism very soon as well. And then finally, we have Lina Khaled Almaeena, who's in Saudi Arabia. And Lina is a Saudi, she's a writer in Saudi, she's a member of a number of committees, include, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Lina, the Shura Council as well in Saudi, which she'll explain a little bit later a bit more about as well. So to start this session, as I say, let's let the women themselves introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Amina. Please tell us a little bit about your journey so far and kind of the work that you're doing right now.
Thank you so much, Rimla. As you know, I'm Amna, Australian-born girl to Lebanese Muslim parents. It was a very unique experience for me coming up, but certainly there was a lot of influence on Lebanese culture on my family unit, and in terms of what they thought was normal for girls to do or not to do. And so that meant sport wasn't really a priority for my family. It was something that you did socially at family events or in the front yard, but it wasn't something you did in an organized way. And everything I've done as a young adult was centered around how do we organize the participation of girls in sport, and how do we create real opportunities for us to be elite if we want to be elite in whatever we do, and how do we remove some of those limiting factors for some Muslim women so that they can genuinely be involved and, you know, chase their dreams essentially. So a couple of years ago, contacted a friend and we started a footy team, and it's Aussie rules football. So it's not soccer for all the international friends who are listening. It's a pear sort of shaped footy. And I've just essentially been driving most of my passion and energy and all the things that I believe around the kinds of freedoms and support women should be given through the footy club. And in that journey, had to learn a lot about my own leadership and about governance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Amina. Hanna, would you like to tell us a little bit about your experiences and your journey in sports journalism? Hanna, I think you're still muted at the moment. So if you just unmute yourself. Okay, just while you're working that out, what I'll do is I'll just move to Lina. So Lina, if you want to introduce yourself and your journey in sport, and then we'll come back to Hanna in a second.
So my name is Lina Khaled Almaeena. I am from Saudi Arabia, and I am the co-founder of Jeddah United. It is a sports academy that focuses on team sports, mainly basketball for women and basketball and football for boys. And as growing up, I have been very much involved in sports because I was in a private Saudi school. So I did have a lot of opportunities to play sports, unlike the government schools, which is now integrated this year. So we're very happy. A lot of great news for sports for Saudi women today, with in light of Vision 2030. But as I was saying, as growing up, also having met with a lot of sports icons that came to the kingdom, like for Umrah, like Muhammad Ali Klai. I remember meeting him as a child. I think that had a great effect on me in a lot of ways where I didn't even realize it. But our family is a very sports-oriented family. That's what we did as entertainment. That's what we did as, so it was social. And we were lucky that in the city of Jeddah, there were a lot of opportunities. But I always felt like it wasn't for everybody. So after I graduated from university, actually, and that's when I realized that there was nothing for that age group. So if you were a young, fresh graduate in your early 20s, you couldn't go back to your school and be like, can I play basketball again? So plus, honestly, something else happened. I also had gotten married and had my first daughter and fell into postpartum depression. And to be honest with you, I think that was a turning point for me, where I felt like it was through sports that I actually felt so much better, like 180 degrees better. And I realized that it was going to be my message in life to promote sports for girls and for boys in my community. And I've been doing that, for the past 15 years.
Mashallah, that's thank you for sharing that with us. It's often, I find, those stories, those very personal stories and motivations and inspirations that help us make a change for everyone else. So it's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lina. Hanna, let's come back to you. You are a sports journalist. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to get into sports journalism. Okay.
Hi, Rimla. Thank you so much. I'm a sport journalist, and I've been doing this for the past 13 years. And I always believe in dreams. When I was in middle school, I read newspaper and I saw like a journalist interviewing big stars of sport, especially in football, in soccer, and that I made myself a promise that I'm going to be a sport journalist. But a lot of friends, family says that sport journalist, it's all man. So I made a promise that I will be a sport journalist. So I enrolled myself to the journalist schools after I graduated. And moving forward, that I work for this company based in Jakarta, and since then dreams come true. So I become a sport journalist, and I can lots of sport events, World Cup, Euro Cup, and men's. But then I realized a lot of the sports female journalists, they don't have the chance to think as I do. So the next goal is to engage with the female sport journalists and working out about the obstacles, also about the challenges, also promoting that media, sport journalists also for women. That's my goals right now.
Okay, fantastic to hear. Thank you for sharing that, Hanna. So I wanted to take the discussion now a little bit deeper, and you know, one of the things, I think starting off with you, Lina, in terms of your story at Jeddah United, you talked a little bit about why you started it from a personal perspective, some of the inequalities you saw, but also the passion that you have for sport, obviously. What really drove you internally to say this was something that was going to create a cultural shift within this, I guess, within the Saudi sports scene for women, because it was something that was unique and innovative, something that challenged the norms? What was that whole process like for you?
Well, there was definitely misinterpretation of religious texts when it comes to women's sports. And I really was very passionate about that. It's actually in the core of the Muslim religion to be an active person. And I read a lot. I did a lot of research, especially when you look at the pillars of Islam. I'm going into religion because that was the argument, the counter argument that people used to try to discourage women and girls from getting into sports. So, for example, if you look at praying, so the praying is about it's about movement, and it's about how you're standing and you're moving and you're kneeling and you're bowing, and all these movements are very important because it does symbolize the importance for a Muslim and a human and just any human being to be active, and you're doing that 5 times a day, and it is in in the core of your religious faith. And also when you look at the 5th pillar, which is the Hajj, and you see that when you're going around in circles around the Kaaba 7 times, when you're going up and down the Safa and Marwa. So I tried to use that as examples to promote it and actually encourage more girls and people in society who had doubts about team sports and girls who are getting into sports. But also I looked at it from an international perspective. So when we look at how women in sports have evolved around the world, you look at a country like the United States of America, where they got their equal rights to participate in sports only in the 70s with Title IX. So this is huge. So you learn from other experiences around the world and what type of struggles and challenges that they went through in order for them to reach to where they are today. So obviously, when I used to get calls, for example, during the Olympics, and it was always, a lot of times it was about the head cover or the hijab. So they always used to say, how can you play and participate in sports while you're covered or you're run? I get that a lot. And I always used to say that, the beauty about the Olympics is that there should be no discrimination against any, gender, religion, ethnicity, etc. And I always like to say that we as Muslims believe that we are an extension of Judaism and Christianity. So when you look at women, in the past, the modesty and head cover was part of these religions. So when you look at women in church today, they cover. So I just always like to show that the covering or not covering is not the issue. It's about, the identity, and it's about enabling women to play sports regardless of what they're wearing. So I kind of jumped into a couple of things, but no,
that's good. It will keep the discussion going, and some really interesting points and important points that I think point to really equality in sport, but also through sport, and we'll come to that topic a little bit later. I wanted to just bring in Amna at this stage because, when you set up Auburn Giants, we will forgive you for making it Aussie rules. It's okay. Football's football, really. But we obviously, through that setting up of that team, you were being a leader as well, in the same way that Lina was setting up Jeddah United and doing something different. You did it in Australia, so totally different kind of cultural context, but actually what you were doing fundamentally was the same. You were trying to create change through sport. Tell us a bit more about that journey. Why you started the team, really, and what were the values that you were trying to push through that setting up of Auburn Giants?
At the time that we set up the team, I think I was going through a personal struggle with my own family around what I could or couldn't do. So I could go to university, I could work, but I couldn't play sport. And for me, that was incredibly frustrating. At the same time, I was in my high school years post 9/11, and there was an international conversation about my identity and the identity of Muslim women, and should we cover, shouldn't we? And it was so contentious. I mean, everyone had something to say about it. And so for me, organizing a space for women makes sense. The fact that we didn't have access to those opportunities already was incredibly frustrating for me. And personally, it was something I felt very passionate about because I understood what it was to feel restricted from that. And so for me, I think what ended up happening in terms of my leadership is I started to learn about balancing my value for tradition and culture and religion, and understanding the centrality of that. And when people understand religion or their culture in a particular way, that change takes time. And at the same time, I was recognizing that I am a very passionate person. And when I believe in something and I want to bring about change, that it can be quite disruptive for people. And disruption is very uncomfortable for traditional people. And so I feel like all my learning has been around the intersection of valuing tradition and disruption, which is kind of weird because for most people they'd be in totally opposite camps, but for me they're the perfect marriage.
It's interesting you talk about disruption, and that for me is something that when you want a cultural shift to happen, and I don't mean cultural in terms of, you know, ethnicity, I mean culture in general. When it comes to leadership positions, even when you're talking about governance and cultural shifts in terms of governance, disruption, as you say, can be very difficult. You know, people talk about not wanting a revolution, but an evolution. But how long do you have to wait to see that change happen? Is that something that you come across in the work that you do as well, that difficulty with cultural change?
Absolutely. And, you know, I ask myself the same question. For some of us, we respect that things take time. When I started, I was really young, energetic. I wanted change it was simple. There was no bureaucracy. It wasn't political. It was really, really simple. If I want to play footy, it should be fine. I should be supported. Why is it a problem? And as you grow older, I think certain things fall into place. And one of the things that I really valued this prophetic teaching around speaking to people at their level. You know, that true wisdom is about actually recognizing this person is of this intellect or this age or this experience, and they can be communicated with in this way. And this is how they become receptive or not receptive at all. And so when I started to think about how I use my influence, and people started using words like influencer or change agent, you know, these sexy buzzwords that we all love so much, I actually think about it in the prophetic sense and how we were taught that, you know, you either speak good or you keep quiet, or when you do have something to say, because for you it's about integrity and speaking truth and speaking your truth, and my truth might be different from someone else's, then how do you do that in a way that is effective? And that really is about having wisdom.
For sure, very wise words from you there as well. I think many of us have learned that through our journeys. Just to come back to you, Hanna, you know, as a sports journalist, as a female sports journalist, actually, is that something that is, you know, common? Do you see a lot of female sports journalists in Indonesia?
Yeah, we do have a lot, not as much as our male counterparts, but the number of female sport journalists in the past few years is increasing, and that makes me happy. And because a lot of thinking that female sport journalists do not have the ability, endurance as much as our male counterpart. But it's totally wrong. We do have the capability what we need is trust. And in the past 2 years, we meet a lot the female sport journalists based in Jakarta, and we are trying to what would be one of the major issue is the lack of confidence of the female sport journalists. They kind of shy in promoting themselves at the office because of the feelings of afraid of being rejected. But for me, it's okay of being rejected, but you need to try first. At least you tried. At least you prove what your capability is. And if you don't believe your own capability, who else will believe? I think we should move from there. In Indonesia, I read a lot and also talk a lot with my other female sport journalists in other country. They face the gender issue, but we don't have it here. Maybe just a little case, but we don't really have it here. We don't have the salary issues. We still have the same salary. The journalists and also the athlete, we don't have that issues. But what we face is like the lack of confidence. I think that's the major issue in the female sport journalists here in Indonesia.
Okay. All right. We're having obviously a little bit of trouble with Hannah's connection. It's probably the Wi-Fi that's causing a bit of a delay and obviously a slowing down of her voice. But in terms of obviously what she spoke about there, we had a lot there around one, the fact that it seems to be for a lot of female sports journalists that it's increasing in numbers, obviously, but also there's a sort of an issue around lack of confidence to actually push yourself to where you can potentially get to. But it was an interesting point that she made around gender pay and equality in general. In Indonesia, she's saying that it's not an issue. Obviously, Indonesia being a Muslim country, she's saying that there isn't much gender discrimination there. She feels like an equal in that space. So whilst the numbers are still needing to increase, when the women do come in that space, they feel as though they're not discriminated against, or they don't feel different because of their gender. They're just a sports journalist, which is wonderful to see there. In terms of Lina, in terms of participation of women in Saudi Arabia in sport, obviously we've seen the development of the Vision 2030. I've personally been involved with developing a mass participation program, obviously in Saudi Arabia, which we connected over a while back. Where do you see that development coming from? We've seen Princess Rima bint Bandar Al Saud, who's really pushed gender rights and change through the empowerment of women. You've been a huge part of that as well, I know. Where have you seen that come from? What leadership have you seen? What great leadership have you seen? How would you define good leadership in that sense?
I just have to comment on one thing that Hanna had mentioned regarding equal pay. So to the surprise of, you know, a lot of people in the international community, we in Saudi Arabia, in the government sector, have no discrimination, and we have actually equal pay between men and women, which is very, very nice to share, because a lot of people don't know that. Our Crown Prince is encouraging more and more the private sector to do the same, even though the margin is very low, very small between men and women anyway in pay, even in the private sector. Having said that, I can definitely tell you that the leadership that we live in today, Saudi Arabia, in less than 2 years has transformed, I would say, you know, in decades. What we are going through is an absolute transformation, social, economic. We are diversifying from an oil-based economy to an economy that is very much focusing on our 70% youth population under the age of 30. 81% of our population is under the age of 45 years old, and this is a very young society, actually one of the youngest in the world. So that is our capital. And what this vision is trying to do is it's trying to create new sectors in sports, in entertainment, in tourism, in archaeology, and getting the youth involved. Honestly, I think what this government under King Salman and the Crown Prince, the young Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has done, they have really changed. When you talk about paradigm shift, Islam was very much stereotyped. I mean, I can tell you, I feel the difference. Just, I mean, in less than 2 years, we're really shifting from Islam being labeled as a religion of, that discriminates against women, that oppresses women, suppresses women, into modern Islam, into a more, into the real Islam, in showing the real true image. Because at the end of the day, Saudi Arabia is the heart of the Muslim world. And obviously, we're the center of Islam, being the host of the two holy mosques. And what the king finds pride in is his title from a king to a custodian of the two holy mosques. This is very important. And I think this is, we're taking the lead in that sense to fight extremism and fight chauvinism and misinterpretation of religious texts that some people try to really hijack the true meaning and the true essence of Islam and what it really means for humanity, not just for the Muslim community. I'm talking about what it really means to be a Muslim in the world and share those beautiful messages of peace and coexistence and, prosperity to humanity at large.
And you're, am I correct in saying you are part of the Shura Council in Saudi? So tell us a little bit, tell our viewers a little bit about that and what that means for you, and particularly what it means in terms of your development of sport for women and girls in the region.
So the Shura Council is the highest consultative council to the king, and it means it is the Saudi parliament, a version of a parliament. And what it does is we review the annual reports for all the ministries. We propose legislations. We can propose to alter existing legislations. And when it comes to sports in specific, what we have been doing in the Shura Council was fighting to integrate PE in government schools. And we were so happy that this year, in September 2017, last year, with the beginning of school, that has been integrated. And obviously, it was a combination of efforts from so many different entities, mainly the Ministry of Education and the minister who announced the integration of PE in government schools. Also, the fact that women can enter the stadiums, join as part of the family, and attend, football stadiums, basketball, and et cetera, et cetera. This was something that we weren't able to do in the past. Now it's, we're part of this sports community, and we get to go there and enjoy watching all these championships. women licensing gyms, for example. There was no such thing as women gyms. But Princess Rima has worked so hard, and she's actually been able to enable us to issue the licensing. Obviously, there are issues in regards to not the General Sports Authority, but the other entities involved, because at the end of the day, it's new, and for them to centralize and to basically collaborate all the different entities that are involved, like the municipality or the civil defense, et cetera, it's a little challenging in that sense, but we're definitely have moved forward and jumped so many leaps in a very short time, in my opinion.
That's fantastic to hear, and I think it's quite an exciting time for you guys there as well. Just wanted to welcome Hanna back, and hopefully we'll come to you in a second as well. But I wanted to come to you, Amina. Obviously, from Lina's perspective in Saudi, she's gone through her own challenges to get sports for girls on the map. But for you, you're in a totally different cultural context, in the sense that you are in a country that is minority Muslim, right? So it's not majority Muslim like Indonesia or Saudi Arabia. And therefore, potentially, the challenges that you've faced would be different. It's a different cultural context, as I say. In your experience, and it's quite a broad question, so I'm happy for you to kind of break it down as you like. Do you feel that sport is inherently discriminatory towards minority communities?
Out of all the questions, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that one. Trust you to give me the hairy one, Rimla. Look, I feel like questions like that are really difficult to answer, because people can either argue that sport is the equalizer or sport is inherently discriminatory. I think you should ask an academic. What I can tell you in my experience, though, is that there are still challenges for girls within families and communities. And just like we're talking about some of the milestones across the world in terms of the visibility of Muslim women and the rights of Muslim women improving, there are still challenges, because shifting attitudes takes a really long time. Outside of Muslim communities, there are also challenges when you're part of minority communities. So, on many occasions when I've been part of a campaign, a public campaign, promoting health, physical activity, sport and rec, you would be astounded by the vitriol and racism that sits under what I think are some incredible campaigns that I'm really humbled to be part of. And so that says to me that not everybody in society is on board. When we have issues that are not about Muslim minorities, but other minority groups being discriminated against, and there have been a few, big instances in sport, it worries you. When you look at what's happening in the United States, where some of them have made political statements around the rights of Black people, for example, and the campaign Black Lives Matter, and the reaction of the public to those athletes doing that, and the reaction of people in business and in sport. So it says to me that, people are happy when minorities are participating in sport, but when we speak to the issues that we're challenged by, it makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And so, is there a degree of discrimination based on our gender, our faith, our cultural background, our age, where we live? Certainly, those things come into play. But I think to say sport is inherently discriminatory is a very big statement that I can't just go, yeah, no worries. It's ask an academic.
I have to ask something controversial, right? So it's going to be in there in terms of a question. But coming to you, Hanna, I remember we had a chat and you were talking a little bit earlier on about the fact that you think that actually in Indonesia, sports journalists or just women in general in the fields that they work within, you don't feel like there's a difference between men and women working in that space. Okay, there's the pay and the salary side of things where you feel, there's an equality there. But then just more broadly, when we were talking previously, you said you've never come across any situations in your own country in terms of dealing with discrimination, but actually when you've gone outside of Indonesia, that's where you faced it. Tell us a little bit more about that. Yeah, I think we're still having trouble hearing.
Yeah, you're right, Rimla. And yeah, we sport journalists or media industry, we don't have the issue of the discrimination and
Okay, I think we're having.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with Hannah. This is so sad because I know she has some amazing, amazing things to say. And we're going to try and fix that for you, Hannah. Still, we've got time to hear from you, so we're going to try and fix that with you. But I'll carry on going for now with obviously with Lina and with Amna, who are obviously, you know, in themselves have got so much good to say. But just in terms of then, Lina, coming back to you, what do you see as kind of the future, I guess, for girls and women in Saudi Arabia when it comes to sport, and in terms of future leadership within the country as well?
Well, since we were a historic decision to participate in the Olympics in 2012 in London, we had 2 athletes, and then that increased to and doubled to 4 in 2016 in the Rio Olympics. And so many new sports and new federations have developed. We're very lucky to have Princess Rima as the president of the mass participation, obviously, and that's important because it's definitely it's sports for all, and it's very important to obviously include women and encourage women, but also I think give opportunities to all segments of society. So when you talk about like sports for the disabled and for even the elders, I'm very interested to start a group for, you know, the retired, you know, even if it's walking, and promote it really for everybody, all ages, both genders, different, you know, cases. And I think that we're really on the right track in that sense, because we have integrated in schools and changing the culture. And in that, what's going to happen, not just economically, but also from a health perspective, it's going to really revolutionize the country in a sense that the 19 billion reals that we spend on treating like diseases that have erupted due to the lack of physical activity is going to really change the country in amazing and positive ways. But when you talk about sports, I think that we're a very diverse country. We have a lot of scenery. And when you look at, like, for example, climbing, we have beautiful mountains, and climbing is one of the sports. There's a new federation for that. And this group that the many groups that have come up after this vision was announced, and the different sports, whether it's the scuba divers or the motor riders, and so many things have erupted due to this new vision that is trying to increase the physical activity from 13% to 40% by 2030. So, for example, I'm going to share my story with Princess Rima in 2012. So we were a group of 10 climbers that went to Everest Base Camp in Nepal. And our message was to show the relationship, promote sports for women in Saudi Arabia, and also show the relationship between physical activity and breast cancer. Because breast cancer is at a high in Saudi, your chances of getting breast cancer is lower for women who are more active. And even in the chance that, God forbid, they do, suffer from breast cancer, their chances of recovery is much higher. So that was something I was very honored to be a part of that group, to raise awareness and to, also have a very interesting intercultural experience in that sense, to a country like Nepal.
Well, I have a whole another level of admiration for you now, because I always say that I could never survive in the cold that is Mount Everest. So well done on that. And I remember seeing that picture of the ribbon, with the ribbon that you guys took of that project. So it was great to see. And you spoke earlier on how you got into sport as well around, you know, the postpartum depression that you were yourself experiencing. What do you think is the role that sport has to play in terms of these wider, you know, wider areas, in terms of mental health, in terms of obviously physical health? Obesity is massive in Saudi Arabia, diabetes in young people in particular. And I remember in 2012, I did some work around the King Abdullah Sports City, around kind of how do you develop this strategy around sports participation. So what do you think is the role that sports has to play in the development of the entire country in that sense as well?
So I actually, because I experienced the effect of sports at a younger age, it was easy for me to find my way even when I felt like I needed it most, which is, as I said, when I suffered from postpartum. But I really, and I continued, by the way, my master's in psychology, and I looked at the relationship between sports and the psyche. So the effect of the endorphins, of how you have your happy hormones kicked in every time you exercise for 20 minutes, and how it makes you a better person psychologically, mentally. Academic studies about how kids who are in team sports perform much better academically than kids who are not. So all that has to be highlighted more. I think media has a big role to play. But I think when you look at it from that perspective, sometimes we narrow down the effect of sports and the importance of sports for just the competitive aspect or the physical aspect, and we don't look at the holistic approach to sports. You know, when you think about it, like psychologically, mentally, emotionally, socially, how you can send amazing messages through the language of sports. And even politically, you know, we have had, every year we organize a friendly game to a different country. So we've traveled, our Jeddah United women's team have traveled around the world. Every year we've gone from the United States to Jordan, Malaysia, Maldives, Paris, UAE, etc. And it was because we wanted to build bridges of friendship and get to learn new cultures, and also share our own, you know, culture and change stereotypes about Saudi women specifically, and Muslim women in general, obviously. So this is part of what sports can do on that international level. So it's really so many, you know, beautiful aspects related to sports. However, having said all that, it's very important to have a management, to have coaches that really teach the true essence of sports and sportsmanship, and, you know, and how important it is to, especially in competitive sports, to respect your opponent, and how to accept, you know, the win, and you, even the losses, you look at it as learning. And that is very important, because you definitely can get to negative emotions if you are not properly trained and taught to how to deal with, you know, contact sports specifically. So in that sense, that's an area that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, Amna, I wanted to come to you on that, in terms of the work that you've been doing, obviously with Open Giants and beyond that, in terms of that kind of development of individuals through sports in particular. So how have you seen the development of your community through sport? Particularly, I'm looking at leadership now, the development of young leaders, the future leaders. How have you seen that happen through the work that you're doing in Australia?
The fascinating thing is, I think we went through a period in Australia where we cared a lot about youth development and leadership. And then there was a lot of work directed into using sport as a vehicle to engage with at-risk young people. And for a little while, I felt like we kind of took our foot off the pedal in terms of our focus on developing leadership. But I realized really quickly through the football club that grassroots leadership is how we end up having leadership across society. It's how we have leadership in workplaces, in our family units. It's where we can actually build confidence. And a lot of the work that we do with our girls, so we've worked backwards. We started with a women's team, then we built under 18s and under 15s, and we even have under 12-year-old girls come along and have a run who want to play with the big girls. And, you know, the youth girls want to play with the adult women. And so all the girls want to play with the bigger girls, right? And that sisterhood is such a good space, because in the Arabic word would be nasiha, where you offer that advice and that counsel to someone else. It's where people genuinely look out for you when you're doing it tough or you're hanging your head for whatever reason. It's where you get around each other and that camaraderie and that sisterhood comes through. So that only exists in a space where there's good leadership and good culture. And so I'm very proud of the work that we do with the girls, but I'm also proud of the growing community and network that I'm part of, like this, people like you, Rimla, and Asma Hilal, who work tirelessly to create these kinds of initiatives and connect women across the world so that even we are developing in our maturity and our capacity to have these very important conversations.
And allyship, that's something that we've talked about. So when we set up the Muslim Women in Sport Network, it was about allyship. It was about forming a sisterhood, a global sisterhood, because to many extents we are kind of taking over now, I feel. So we're kind of developing in so many ways across. That's going to sound so wrong, isn't it? But hey, we'll take it. We are developing on so many fronts. Not just, and I keep making this point because it's so important, we're not just doing it for Muslim women and girls, we are doing it for everybody. We are innovating, and we've shown that across this summit. How important is allyship and sisterhood for you in terms of, it can be a lonely place when you're a leader in sport that is in the minority. How important is that allyship and these kind of networks for you?
And alliances with women all over the world and locally is very important. I honestly don't think I would be here. And this is the thing, right? I think when I started this journey, I felt very alone in some of the challenges I was dealing with within my family unit. And I grew up trying to cover a lot of things that were happening from the public space because I felt like the Muslim community was under so much scrutiny already. And so what supported me and what gave me strength and confidence to carry on with the work that I was doing was my alliances to other women, both in and outside of the Muslim community. And I think that can't be underestimated as well. I realized very quickly that actually some of the challenges I'm dealing with are not unique to Muslim women only, because white women or non-Muslim women are also dealing with different gender battles, either at work and in their family units. It's just not visible in the same way that the gender battle I was dealing with is visible. And so for me, it was about it was a maturing, I guess, of my own understanding of the problem in front of me. I think I saw it in a really narrow, specific way because of my experience. And then I kind of broadened up that understanding and went, actually, while there are elements that are unique to me, this could be a much more common experience than I'm acknowledging. And so those alliances with all women became really important for me.
Was there a moment where you suddenly thought, oh, it's not about me? Because I've had this as well. When people come up to you and they sort of say, oh, you're an inspiration and I love what you're doing and all this kind of stuff. And you're kind of like, what, me? Just, I'm just kind of trying to make it, I'm trying to do something here. And I'm sure you've had it, Amna. I can see it, that's something that would have happened for you. And when was that moment for you to suddenly think, oh, wow, I've got to do something here with this space that I've been given?
I realized it very early on. Because after our first year, we had media engagement and so much positivity in the public space and in mainstream media. We're talking national newspapers, national radio, national television. And I was thinking, geez, like corporates pay for this space. And they're coming to us and asking us for our voice. And I think I realized quickly that our voice is a very powerful and important piece. And if I didn't want people to hijack my identity, and it was about identity politics for me, 50% of it was personal in terms of my family, but the other 50 was about people hijacking my story and telling me who I am. Well, then here's my platform. In saying that, it was very uncomfortable for me. And I think it was touched on earlier that a lot of women shy away from recognition and
Yeah, I think we might have just, again, having a few Wi-Fi issues possibly with Amina's connection there. I'll come to you then, Hanna. I wanted to bring you in because, you know, journalism plays a huge role in terms of, and journalists play a huge role in terms of the story and how it's told. And I'd really love to hear from your perspective, you know, as a sports journalist, you are someone who's in a unique position to tell stories. You are a leader in sport in that way, I think. How important is it for you to kind of, I guess, be that role model, as it were, for that next generation? How are you developing through your work and through your narrative, you know, a pipeline, as it were, of future Hannas coming through, not just in sports journalism, but beyond that?
Okay, I think that it's very important for the female sport journalists to set a few goals, and also that we need to influence our surrounding. We need to make sure that women's sport is very, very important, and it has right to be spread on. So it's really important, and we have that voice. So we need to have, we also have to engage with another female sport journalists, that even though we work for the different media, but we need to have this one concern that the female sport journalists have place, and also female sport also have place in society. And that's what makes me very concerned also, to encourage female students that they also have place in media industry. So me and a few colleagues in the sport journalists, that we go to universities to encourage these young women about sport journalists and journalism as a global, so they can also be inspired and knows that it's not only female male industry, that they also have a place, and we can show them that it's okay to have a dream becoming a sport journalist. It's also their place to be. And what they afraid of, it's like about the harassment, about the gender things, but it's not really happening here in Indonesia, because it's like you said, I experience it abroad, not really in Indonesia. So I have this experience when I was covering the World Cup. So we are queuing, and then this huge man literally grabbed me and moved me from the queue, and telling me that you are a woman, you not belong here.
Wow.
And that's happened during the South Africa World Cup 2010. And that experience really shocked me. I never had the gender harassment experience during my years as a sport journalist, but that moment makes me realize that a lot of people still don't feel kind of okay to have a female sport journalist. So that gave me the like I need to do something. And then me and a few colleagues make this forum, so the female sport journalists can encourage each other and can make something. One of the things is that we're going to universities to spread this message.
Mm-hmm. That's a shocking incident, and for anyone to think that they have the right to touch a woman's body is a huge thing for me. But you know, it's interesting. You know, Lina was talking about earlier on that yes, there were obstacles to overcome and opportunities that needed to be presented to women in Saudi Arabia, but there's always, you know, in those countries, there's almost that parity exists, the respect exists in many other ways. And here in the UK, you know, we've had this requirement now, a couple of requirements around gender parity. One is that sports boards have had to sign up to a governance code, which requires 30% of the board to be women minimum, as well as they have, government has legislated that any organization that has over 250 employees has to show the gender pay gap. So gender pay, discrimination, gender disparity in terms of governance and discrimination, decision making even on boards, is a huge issue in what we would consider, or what certainly here people would consider themselves to be more developed. And then you go to places where people are very, you know, negative about Muslim countries in particular, like Indonesia, like Saudi Arabia, and yet you have this respect, you have this sense of parity when the women do get into the space. The question is getting the women into the space, I guess. Would you say that's a fair reflection?
Yeah, and we have, it's kind of different in Indonesia. In sport, it's not really that obvious, but it's like in politics, they have like this requirement, the 30% of women representative in the parliaments and also in political parties. But on the football, like the football association or the sport association, it's not really clear the message is, like the regulation and stuff, because women not really have the confidence of going to that position. So it's still it's small amount of women who have the courage, who have the confidence to do so.
Okay. And in terms
and
of
also,
oh, please carry on, Hannah, please.
And also I think since 2 years ago, we have the Secretary General of our FA is a woman right now. It's such a great example, and also a great progress, because we never have the women as a Secretary General on our FA. So it's bring a lot of better things, not really says that previous not really good. We don't really we appreciate that we have some women's representative in our FA now.
That's it's great to see that kind of progress. And I think, Lina, for me, you know, if you started a business, you know, Jeddah United was kind of like that, I guess, in many ways, whilst you was trying to create social change as well. It was that kind of model. What is the one thing, we've had a question in from one of our viewers, what is the one thing that you tell a young Muslim girl who's interested in starting her own business? What is that one lesson that you would share?
For me, I think that if it weren't for passion, I don't think I would have continued. There were so many risks, the risks of me not getting a job, the risk of me putting all my time and my energy and my effort in this type of social entrepreneurship for it to happen. But I just really should have said that when I first started to Amna. And you know, Amna really made me think of how, and also to Hanna, when she talks about harassment. I think one of the, I'm going to tell you what a question I got from an American professor here, and I can tell you that we're very privileged in a lot of ways, and we don't realize how it's harder for minorities, like for Muslim minorities, and for them to get into sports, maybe harder in things and easier maybe in other things. So there was this professor who came and asked me and was very apologetic. She's like, please don't get offended, but I just have a question. And I said, please feel free. I'm very open to any questions, and I'm very, you know, I'm not going to take it in any way. And she asked, how do you play in your abayas? And I realized that, of course, people are going to think that we're playing in our, you know, black robes, and they don't realize that our facilities are all segregated. So in that sense, I play basketball in my shorts and my tank top, and because we're an all-female facility. So that's why I don't think in terms of that, harassment, and we don't really deal with that. Luckily, we're not in that situation. Obviously, it's different when we compete. It's a completely different ball game. But I just wanted to say that when you mentioned that case of sexual harassment, I thought it was, for Hanna and Amna, the struggles that, as also maybe some judgment or the challenges. In that sense, we don't have the same challenges. Obviously, we have our own, but it's very interesting to hear other experiences, because it really makes you think of what you have and versus the other challenges that you hear about. So sorry, I probably jumped from the original question, Rimla. So you need to ask me again.
Yeah, so it was just to say, I guess I could combine it with, there are two questions that have come in from viewers that are a bit similar. One is, as a businesswoman, what would you kind of be your one big lesson for a young girl who's thinking, I want to be my own social entrepreneur, for example? But kind of linking that then to the second question, as you are a leader in your own right, in terms of what you've been doing, you've been paving the way for people. What would be the biggest lesson that you can share with future leaders? So it's about lessons really that you've learned in your journey, whether from a business perspective or whether from a leadership perspective. What would you share with the viewers?
So I've had my wins and I've had my failures. I mean, I can tell you that I think that it's very important to keep trying. I started at a time where there were no women gyms, no women licenses, segments that are opposing it, no clear direction from federation. But I was able to find a loophole, which is getting a license through the Ministry of Commerce. So because I really wanted to, and I felt like I was doing the right thing, and I felt like I was doing something good for society, I was able to find that loophole. And basically, I started in 2006 at a time where everybody would have told me it was impossible to have any type of training for women, but it worked. And I think that it's very important to also really the power of positivity. And I really believe that it's mind over matter. So going back to the Everest Base Camp example, when I climbed Everest Base Camp, I had a torn meniscus. It was extremely challenging for me to climb. And they told me at the mountain, they were like, it's mind over matter, that 60% of the mental strength will cover over the 40% of physical strength that you would need. Obviously, having a leader like Princess Rima, who was pushing everybody and encouraging everybody. And I mean, it's really, I'm very sincere when I say that. That obviously helps when you have good leadership too. But really, really never giving up, being passionate, enjoying what you like. And when I took that risk and I didn't have a job and I felt like, oh my God, this is my passion. I don't have any way of working, because as a young mom, this was before the daycare system in Saudi Arabia. This was before transportation that was being endorsed and women being allowed to drive in 2 more months. So there were so many challenges for women in the workforce, and it still was possible. And I remember reading a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Believe it or not, that book really affected the way I look on my career path, and also on my financials. Was not easy. I did not have the money. I did not have a capital to start with. I started with just, getting money from girls, calling coaches, paying off people. I really didn't have any investment at the beginning. And that's why it's a social entrepreneurship initiative. And I think also having very good relationships with your family, with your friends, and really just taking it very positively, and that really does help. It does pay off, absolutely. The rich dad, poor dad, just having to say that. And so the poor dad would tell his kids, I can't afford it. But the rich dad, when his kids ask him for things that he can't afford, would be like, how can I make this possible? That is the difference between the rich dad, poor dad. And then I wanted to be the rich mom. I wanted to be able to create something that is good for society, obviously, and have a win-win situation where my job becomes something that is good for community, and where is also it pays off good for me too. And I was able to, maintain for 15 years, including my husband who quit his job, and it is now a family business that trains thousands of girls and boys from the age of 3 years old up until men in their 60s play, and we just try to promote team sports for everybody in society and include everybody.
Yeah, so really living those positivity values, but also the importance. I think this is a theme that's coming across right through all of our sessions, wherever you are in the sports space, the importance of family support and that support system around you, really, really important. Thank you for that. Hanna, what do you think? So you're a leader in sports journalism. What do you think is the biggest lesson that you would share with future leaders?
I think my lessons is right now it's a lot of female sport journalists in the industry, and we need to be mentor to each other and also our youngsters. I think that's the main. We need to share our value to the youngsters and also to the young reporters, and that it's my big intake. So we need to open, and also we need to strengthen our core, because sometimes, usually few years ago, I don't have any female sport journalists to look up to, because we don't have this forum, we don't have the connections. And nowadays media, it's really, really a big industry, and we need to be tighten our bond. And I want to share our experience like 2 years ago, when the women in sport and news wins in Australia. They have this initiative to go to the many countries, including Indonesia. So they have this training for sport journalists, and this event is a trigger our female sport journalists together in Jakarta for like 5 days. So this initiative is held by ABC. So female sport journalists all over the country come to Jakarta and have this training, and we are discussing a lot of our problems and also our obstacles. And from this training, we really knew what's going on and what's wrong and what's right and what needs to be done. And we also having these feedbacks, and one of the girls have the courage to tell her boss that I need to be covered, and I have the right to promote myself in covering this World Cup, the upcoming World Cup. And this young reporter, the boss let her to do the upcoming World Cup, and she sent me the message that it is because of the trainings, and I have gained my confidence, and I have gained everything, that I also believe in my ability to do the big coverage of sport event.
So there's definitely something there around kind of building your confidence and giving yourself the I guess the stable platform on which you can really try and push yourself to the top there. So coming to you, Amina, in terms of that question as well, what would be the biggest lesson that you could share with future leaders?
I think it's really hard to ask for one lesson, because I reckon all of us have been learning throughout the whole journey. And once you asked the question, I actually wrote down 3 things. So if you see me look down, I have a notepad. I'm a geek. The first thing I had to learn a lot about was commitment to myself. I've always had a commitment to learning, but the commitment to myself was actually about self-care. When you're trying to pioneer change and grassroots leadership, and you care for so many people, and you feel personally responsible for your effectiveness or your failure or your success, even though there's this idea of tawakkul, like I'm going to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm going to put my trust in him, I'm just a tool on this path, it's still very easy to get caught up in that emotion. So for me, I had to learn about balancing my self-care and that responsibility and that leadership responsibility, not to get sucked in and think it was all about me. The second thing, I had to overcome a great deal of fear and learn a lot about courage. And the courage wasn't actually to do the work. The courage was to be who I am. I felt like a lot of people were telling me what a good Muslim girl does or what a good woman does. And oftentimes I felt like I was being sidelined or silenced. And it was really hard to learn to accept myself, to accept that I am very outspoken, I'm very active, I'm very, non-traditional in a lot of ways. And sometimes people aren't going to respect that and might even undermine me or slander me. But I don't need to change. I just need to be my true self every day. And the more I came to terms with that, I think the more comfortable I became in my own skin and okay I felt with being my authentic self. And the third thing was actually about my ability to think. People tell you what to think, and people tell you Islam says this or we think that, whatever space you're in, everyone has an opinion on what the majority thinking is. And in that sense, everyone's trying to push you to either adopt the status quo or adopt their ideas. And so for me, learning how to reconcile, what do I think about what my religion says? Like, I know that's what my dad thinks. I know that that's what the sheikh thinks. I know that that's what this business person thinks. I know what everyone thinks, but what do I think? How do I take all that information that's coming in and how do I, compartmentalize it so that it makes sense to me? How do I make my own decision and then live with that decision? So those have been the 3 key lessons for me.
And immense one. I think everyone, particularly those listening, have through those experiences where I guess you almost made to question yourself and how you're working and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And we can all, share our stories on that, I'm sure. And one thing that touched me in terms of what you were saying, this idea of being good. What does being good actually mean? And can you define that for yourself? It's a really important thing. And I think young people, particularly growing up, in your formative years, me growing up in the UK as a young person of ethnic, obviously a minority, ethnically as well as a Muslim, that those challenges do come to you through racism, through Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, etc. So really important lesson for young people. So from what you said, I have a question for all 3 of you. Did you have a role model growing up? And if so, who was that and why? So start with you, Amna, because you're on screen.
Okay. I've had so many role models. I actively looked for mentors and role models always because, like I said earlier, I'm a learner. And so for me, I could be with anyone. Like I could meet someone at work and have a conversation and feel like I got some benefit out of that conversation. What I realized, though, is that there probably weren't many people who were comfortable being as disruptive as I am. So that was probably the thing that I struggled to find. Other people who were willing to push the envelope as much as I was willing to push the envelope. So I had a really good support base. I had people that I could soundboard with. But at some point, I recognized that even they would look at me and go, oh, no, here goes Amna with another crazy idea. And that was okay because I knew those people loved me. They cared for me. They gave me their nasiha, in good faith. And they trusted that I was capable to make my own decisions. And those people have been men and women of all ages, experiences, colors, shapes, sizes. Like, for me, it's not, I don't have a thing in my mind that limits where I can learn from and where I find that inspiration.
Thank you. Lina, what do you say in terms of role models?
Like I said, there are so many, but I think if I have to narrow it down to 2, it would be both my parents, my mom and dad. So my mom, as a career woman, as a journalist, as a writer, a publisher, she has 4 different publications, and also somebody who raised 5 kids, and the ability for her to combine, raising kids, but also, focusing on her career was something I definitely learned from. And my father being a very big promoter of sports. I mean, he's a a sports person himself. I played, so many different sports as growing up with him. I played cricket, I played tennis, I played football, and my uncle who was also. So I think in that sense, I would say my father and mother, really.
Okay. So, and that's, again, something I hear regularly. I think we could all resonate with that, definitely. And it's great that you've had those role models in your life. Hannah, what about you?
My family always been my biggest supporters. They always believe in me. And I think they are my role models in some way, especially my mom, because I also come from a big family. I have 5 siblings, including me. So we are at the same page, Lina. And they are really role models. I learn a lot from them, from my sibling, also my parents. And the other one is a fellow journalist. My role model is the journalists out there, especially females, having a lot of obstacles in field, and also they don't have any like they usually don't have the role models, but they are role models of our generation. So they are my role models. We learn a lot from them.
Fantastic. And just in terms of looking at leadership then, in general, what would you say, all three of you, in terms of what makes a good leader? So Amna, let's come to you first.
I think about this question all the time. And I think at different points in my journey, different things have stood out for me. But when I look at my leadership style, I think there are probably 2 or 3 qualities that are very clear. So number 1 is honesty. And that doesn't win you many friends sometimes if not delivered in the right way. You can actually lose your influence on the people you're trying to lead if you don't use your honesty well. But I think the reason honesty is important is because it's tied to so many other things for me. So it's tied to being transparent and accountable and working with integrity. So honesty is definitely probably the thing that I value really, really highly. And then I think very closely attached to that is being a strategic thinker and visionary. So it's, thinking, seeing what's 5-10 years ahead and understanding what I do today actually has a purpose that is so much bigger than me.
Fantastic. So something there around your values, but also obviously in terms of the skill set that you bring to the table there. Thank you, Amna. And Hannah, what do you think? What do you think makes a good leader?
Trustworthy. I think we need to trust, especially our youngsters, like the young generation. We need to give them the trust and also the chance that we need to make them believe have the capability and also have the chance to do greater things than we do right now. And also mentoring.
Yeah. That's a really great point, Hannah. Actually, there's a saying that I've heard, or something that a teacher once said, that isn't it curious that the sheepdog guides from behind? I think it's something like that, if I quoted it right. The whole idea that the leader doesn't lead from in front, they lead from behind, because a true leader develops that next generation of leaders as well, Yeah. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. And Lina, finally to you, what do you think makes a good leader?
You kind of summed up what I was about to say regarding a leader is able to create leaders, really. And I think that it's very important to be a team player, to be able to, obviously, honesty, wisdom, integrity. But for a leader, I think it's very important because, you want to make sure that the legacy or the good work that you're doing continues. And if it's only you and not enabling others to lead after you, or if you're not there, or I think that's going to be very authoritative. So it's very important for a leader to actually create these leaders.
Yeah, and leave a legacy behind them, as you've articulated as well. We've had another question through from our viewers, and it's from Lina Khaled, I think. With the increase in Muslim women in sports, and she believes, we're going to see in the future Muslim women in the elite sports space more than we have already. What can you share from your experience about being a minority in such a big space, the sports industry. So who wants to take that first? Amna, do you want to come in?
I think one of the things I've noticed, whether it's a Saudi woman or it's an Aussie woman, if they're Muslim, I think there's a common thread in the story we hear in the media and in the public. So I feel like there's almost an infatuation, and we're so interesting. And isn't it remarkable that she's actually an athlete who can, you know, against all odds, excel in whatever her chosen sport is. And I think that that narrative, when I hear it, it just irritates me, to be honest. I mean, it's not all of our experience. For some women, playing sport is part of their life and they have a lot of support. And I think it reduces us to a single story. It doesn't allow us to be a diverse set of women, and it takes away the emphasis from the athletic achievement, because the story is only interesting if there's this incredible adversity, but that adversity can't be anything except her Islam. You know, it's not the same adversity as any other woman. It has to be that unique thing that's identified. And that's what I hear. Now, it might not be what everyone hears, but that's what I hear, and it really gets on my nerves. And I think that that's probably going to be a challenge for future Muslim athletes. In that challenge, maybe the other side of the coin is that if they're really clever, they use the opportunity to market themselves and create a unique brand. But, you know, I think for a lot of women, maybe in their gut, there would be some contention with that anyway.
Why do you think that is?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, please, Mina, come in. Come in, it's okay. Let's go.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure. I didn't hear your second question to Amna. But I just really, just to answer that question, I always think of Ibtihaj Muhammad. You know, she is such a role model for Muslim women in sports. Somebody who's an American minority, obviously Muslim, who's won the bronze medal in fencing. And I think that really demonstrates a lot of positivity and encouragement for Muslim women that, you know, it is possible, and in spite of everything. And she's very much liked by a lot, you know, by Americans. I mean, she does represent the USA team. And I think she's done so much to promote Muslim women in sports, honestly. So I think that's, you know, it's really, it depends on the personality, but it is very possible to be able to achieve in spite of the difficulties.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the points around kind of the narrative around Muslim women and owning that narrative, again, this is part of what the network is about, and this is what this summit is about. It's about Muslim women owning their own narrative, and you can hear from every single person's voice that, you know, they have something special to say. And we've been quoting them galore, because every single word that people have, you know, every sentence that's come out of people's mouth has been a very interesting thing to hear about. And I think, I just wanted to come back to you for a second, just in terms of, you know, that narrative. Engaging the media is obviously important in terms of ensuring that Muslim female journalists are out there, the likes of Hanna, who are able to have that context and that understanding so that the narrative changes. But also in terms of just widely discrimination, racism in sport. I know you've been dealing with this in Australia quite a bit. How can you know, see us meaningfully addressing the issues? What is it going to do? What is it going to take to create that step change that we want to see?
Look, I think our previous question and this one kind of tie in together, because while I adore Ibtihaj and completely respect the work that she has done, I think fencing is an individual athletic achievement, and I play team sport. And I think I've seen, well, I don't think I've seen girls that wear hijab in my team feel like they've been sidelined because of invisible, so they can feel it, but they can't call it out, invisible racism. And so the difficulty with playing team sport and trying to excel in team sport when you're a visible Muslim or you're from a minority community, where the conversation is always reduced to, oh, the fact that you're Lebanese or that you're Muslim, is it becomes incredibly frustrating to focus on your athletic pursuit when there's a constant feeling. And for some of these athletes, they're pursuing their dreams for a lot of them, it would start really, really young. So it's hours of rigorous work and determination and grit to achieve this goal, and to fall short every single time. It sometimes feels like, hang on, this is not just about my talent. Something else is happening, and I don't have the words and I don't have the method to address it, nor do I have the confidence or the courage to say something. So there's that aspect, and I find that to be one of the most difficult areas to address, because if I was to call invisible racism out, people would say, well, you know, lots of athletes get knocked back. So how am I supposed to address a problem that, if it's repetitive and you feel it, it sits underneath the surface, then you're not crazy. It exists.
So
That
do you,
is very challenging.
you as an athlete then, as an athlete who is from that background, have a responsibility almost to say, you know what, I'm not going to answer that question. I would rather focus on this. Or as a female sports person, forget all the other layers that we all have. You know, the likes of Serena Williams, the female part is always put there. It's not just an athlete, and people, even women athletes, want to be seen as athletes first and foremost. So is there a role there for athletes to say, I'm not going to follow that narrative that people want to put on me?
I think it takes a great deal of intellect, though. You know, like, I know that when I started doing a media engagement, I was 21. I was quite young. I hadn't been taught to say no to people. Like, no, I'm not going to answer that, or no, I don't want to speak about that. And it's something that I developed really quickly because I was always in uncomfortable situations. I think we have a responsibility as female leaders across the world to enable other upcoming future talent to say, actually, this is where I draw the line. I don't feel comfortable with this. And if they're not willing to do it, that's where we need to be advocates and activists and step in and raise these issues and say, hang on, it's actually not appropriate that you're even asking that question or making that a comment, because underneath sits an assumption, and that assumption might be problematic, stereotypical, and at best discriminatory.
And this is the reason I asked that question. Is a very personal story, actually. Very briefly, as we're coming to the end of our session, I was on the BBC Radio 5 live show. They had an afternoon edition show, which is, for those that don't know, it's one of their main channels, radio shows. And I was talking about my work at the FA. I stood on the FA Council as a leader in football. And we were just talking about my journey, and the interviewer said, so are your family okay with what you're doing? And I sort of sat there half shocked, sort of laughed and said, well, of course they would be, why wouldn't they? To just sort of challenge that narrative I guess in the only way I knew how to in that moment. But it's hopefully that challenge will then in the future prevent a similar question coming up for that next person that comes in from a different environment. So I wanted to come to Hanna actually at this stage as a sports journalist. You know, when you cover women and men from all backgrounds, you know, you've been to World Cups and all sorts of tournaments. But if you were speaking to an elite Muslim sportswoman, how would you decide to cover her? You know, as a journalist, what are the angles that you really think about, and the narrative that you think about when you portray a woman like that?
We didn't thought that we need to see the athlete as a woman or as a Muslim or as a non-Muslim. We always look at the perspective of her achievement or his achievement. That we definitely going to do that on our coverage, but we always have these human interest stories. Then we will create another story that really highlights her achievement of being a female athlete. I think there's also a protest and also the discussion among journalists that why always it's also happened with the disability sports. Person with disability doing sport, they're not always covered by the media. They always pointing at the disability, not on their achievements. I think it's almost the same with the female athletes, but it's not really happening in Indonesia. We always have the things with reflected about the achievement.
Okay. So we are coming to the end of our time now, and I just wanted to wrap up the session by asking everyone one final question. What are your hopes for the future of sports leadership and ensuring that there's a fair representation across sports leadership? Start with you, Amina. You're my go-to girl.
I feel like you ask all the big questions. I have so many hopes for the future. I mean, one of the more immediate selfish hopes of mine is that our football club becomes sustainable and there's a grassroots-led initiative that becomes an institution in the community. I mean, we're 8 years young. That is very, very young, I think, in this space. And so how we make that sustainable is it's been a long learning curve for me, and it's something I think about often. So that's one of my very selfish hopes. But at the national and global level, I hope that, you know, earlier Lina was talking about where Saudi was and where it is now. And I certainly feel like where I started 8 years ago and where the community is now, there's been so much change, both domestically and in the world of Muslim women's sport. So I just I have a strong hope in my heart that every single one of us, incredible women around the world, does contributes so that in 10 years' time or 20 years' time or 50 years' time, we look back and say, you know, we're having kids that don't even know what these issues are anymore because they're non-existent, they're non-issues. They're going to grow up in a time where it's just an equal playing field, and whether they participate or not, or, you know, whether they wear the hijab and they get asked ridiculous questions as you were, Rimla, it just doesn't happen anymore because a lot would have changed in the world and we would have all been contributors to that change.
Yeah, fantastic. Hanna, what are your hopes for the future?
More female sport journalists and also a lot of female female leaders in media. I think that will be a lot of better changing in our future in the media industry. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and the media plays a crucial role. So I agree with you, and I hope that we'll see more diverse representation in sports media. Fantastic. And then
Inshallah.
Lina, inshallah. Lina, finally coming to you. You know, what are your hopes for the future for Saudi women and girls, but obviously beyond that as well, beyond that region?
I really hope that we, through sports, can send out messages of peace and love to humanity and to really better our planet. I mean, when we look at how everybody, it's not just a global, you know, village, it's really a global neighborhood, and how what happens in the shores of California affects us in Saudi Arabia. And I mean pollution, I mean, you know, the climate change and so many things that everybody, we should all unite together, and through sports is a great tool to go ahead and use that tool for better, you know, improving, like I said, the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Every single one of you has said, you know, things and spoken about topics that are so important right now. And in terms of business leadership and leadership in general, community leadership as well, really important discussion to have had. And it's a really special one actually for me personally, because this is the space that I work in. How do you develop leaders within sport, but how do you use sport to develop leaders more widely in society? So it seems to me that, you know, globally there are similar issues, similar themes and trends, and similar hopes as well in terms of what you guys have just spoken about. So thank you so much for sharing that. We've got so many great messages around the power of positivity. I got messages around perseverance, around resilience, and the importance of that in terms of developing that within the future development. Leaders create leaders, is what Lina said. You know, about integrity, vision, etc. So many really important areas that we've covered today. We hope that you've enjoyed the session. We've got one final session, everybody, later on today, 6 o'clock UTC, which again, I always give it by London time. It's 7 o'clock this evening in London, which is going to be with Shaheen B, who's a researcher and particularly looks at community development through research here in England. And she will be speaking with our moderator, Indira Kaljo from Saudi Arabia. So please do join that one as well. Please do join in with more questions as you have done today. And we look forward to joining all of you for our session later today. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye, Rimla.